So, I want to talk about a topic that happens with fearful avoidance in romantic relationships and even friendships the most. And this is what I would like to call the fearful avoidance sudden exit. Um, and I say this like very compassionately for fearful avoidance and compassionately for people on the receiving end of this. And it's because fearful avoidance. So, in this video, we're going to cover why a fearful avoidant basically suddenly exits relationships, what subconscious mechanics are often at work when that does take place, and then what you can do if you're on the receiving end and what to work on if you are a fearful avoidant and see this in some of your habits and patterns. So, first and foremost, what tends to happen is fearful avoidants have a great capacity to really like notice and feel and be hypervigilant about recognizing what other people's needs are and emotions are. And as a result, fearful avoidants tend to be very generous people in relationships. So they tend to, and because they also have different core wounds around fearing being bad or feeling unworthy, they tend to sort of overcompensate for those core wounds by overgiving. And also because they tend to be more attuned to and enmeshed with other people's emotions than their own. And then they'll often prioritize other people's needs above their own. But that's not sustainable in relationships. And fearful avoidants often don't have a conscious recognition of when they feel like there's a big imbalance in relationships until it gets very far down the line. So, what we'll often see happening with FAs is they will overgive in their relationships, they'll pour into relationships, and there's sort of this subconscious expectation FAs tend to carry that somebody would pour in right back and give back and see them and understand their needs without having to talk about them. And often, what takes place is fearful avoidants do that, and then they pour in for so long, they start feeling run dry in their relationship and that starts turning into resentment or avoidance. And it's not even so much that they're like avoiding the person in full, it's that they're avoiding the way that the interaction makes them feel. So even if they love the person, even if they care about the person, they're often feeling like burnt out or unseen or like their needs don't matter or just run dry by the relationship. And eventually they start avoiding that because at a deep subconscious level, it's a protective mechanism to try to come back into balance, is to push the person away that is taking more than they're giving in the relationship to a degree that's making it feel very imbalanced. Now, another version of this, particularly in romantic relationships, will also be that a fearful avoidant may overgive and then get triggered to feel like they are betrayed or taken advantage of, and may actually feel quite frustrated by that. And what essentially takes place is because fearful avoidants are carrying this subconscious belief system that says, I can't communicate my needs because they won't be met. It's not even like that they know that they have that belief. It's like an unknown that they can communicate their needs or that would be beneficial. So instead, because they think that everybody's supposed to just kind of understand each other's needs if they care, they start to feel also a little bit resentful or frustrated quite often, or even betrayed and taken advantage of at worst by that relationship. And eventually, what takes place is there becomes a tipping point where they don't do this and they suddenly pull away. If they don't communicate, they usually have to self protect eventually and they pull away ever so suddenly. And this really leads to a lot of frustration from the other person because oftentimes fearful avoidants are so there and so available. And so the juxtaposition of them being that way and then not is so extreme to somebody. And so what takes place in that sort of intermediate space is that the other person on the receiving end is left feeling really hurt and confused. And the fearful avoidant feels like they've justified it because they're like, well, I was so burnt out that if the person took so much of my energy, I don't owe them anything. I gave them enough. And so we often see like this sort of standstill that takes place. And at its root, it's just both people's inner trauma, right? It's that both people, one person's feeling traumatized by this trauma that sort of is being spread onto others because of the lack of boundaries and communication of needs that starts with the fearful avoidant in their experience. So if you are an FA, we'll talk about how to go through like with some steps and tools you can take and use. And if you're on the receiving end, we'll talk about something as well there. I also want to highlight that we have a course that covers all of this. It is called our Codependency and Enmeshment course, and it applies not just to fearful avoidance, but anxious preoccupied individuals and even avoidant individuals on that sort of counter dependent side that in its roots has to do with some degree of enmeshment. So, Anyways, you can check that course out for free for 7 days using the link below. But what you'll see often is on the fearful avoidance side, one of the biggest breakthroughs you'll have in relationships is learning to have boundaries in a healthy way and learning what your needs are from others. And also, if you need space or time to yourself, and being able to communicate that on such a regular basis that it doesn't feel scary. Like it should feel like if you're like, hey, can you pass me the glass of water? Like it's that simple. And we want to, as fearful avoidance, in order to heal and get out of that codependent set of patterns, be able to communicate our needs openly, and without hesitation or reservation with others. And in doing that, it will stop you from getting into that pattern or cycle. And it will also allow you to feel seen and heard and understood. Sometimes your need will be, hey, I love and care about you. I wish I could have a call with you this evening, but I just need some time to myself. Can we chat tomorrow? And that's you respecting your space and time as well as that other person's, right? So you can go back and forth and have those dialogues. So I have some exciting news, which is that we are doing $1,000 off of our lifetime membership sale to the Personal Development School, which means you get access to literally everything at PDS for your entire rest of your life. Essentially, that entails all of our different courses you have lifetime access to. I do 4 live webinars a week, every single week. You can access them ongoing, and you get access to all of our daily community events. So I'd love to see you on the other side, and you can access it by using the link in the description box below. If you're on the receiving end of this, sometimes it can be really tough. And sometimes I think you want to keep going back to the FA and seeking that like closure or that certainty. And sometimes the FA will give it and sometimes they won't. Usually when FAs don't give it, it's because they're carrying some deep subconscious guilt around it, which guilt tends to make fearful avoidance feel more avoidant in this particular situation. And so what happens is if there's this guilt component there, then often we'll see the fearful avoidant just sort of pull away further. And your job, if you see this starting to unfold, in a relationship, you can always tell somebody, hey, look, I'm seeing that you're not communicating your needs. You have to work on that, right? You can let the person know, and obviously it's their work to do. But your job, if you're hurt and you're on the receiving end and the person's not available to give you that certainty and closure, is to find other ways to get it from yourself. Also, by being able to understand the needs that that person was meeting in your life and meet some of them yourself and find other healthy relationships to help fill that void that's there from that person. And the more you fill that void up by finding other ways of meeting your needs, the more it will give you this sense of peace and closure, because it's not part of what hurts when somebody pulls away from us is that the needs that they were meeting are there's a void there, right? They're not being met. So by showing up for those and taking care of those things in the relationship to yourself, that will go a very, very long way. And also, if you are looking for some kind of certainty and closure, you can always send like an email or a message just to sort of wrap that for yourself. And then in future relationships, ensure that you are, finding that sort of symbiotic balance going forward, so that you don't have to be put through a potential circumstance like that longer term. And I think a lot of people, like it's not at all the person's fault on the receiving end, but a lot of people are just left like, oh my gosh, kind of blindsided. Like I didn't see this coming. What happened? And then the other party sort of is justifying it in their mind because they got so burned out, and then they're afraid to reapproach because they feel guilty and afraid of being burnt out again. And you just see this sort of like injustice there. So on the receiving end, it's so important to be like, how can I find certainty in new ways in my relationships, other relationships in my life, relationship to self? And what is the list of all the other needs that this person was meeting? And how can I start meeting those needs in my own life and in relationship to self as well? So I hope this gives you some clarity. I hope this brings some understanding. Again, a really great course for this. Literally both parties on the receiving end and the giving end of this is the Codependency and Enmeshment course. It's free. You can check it out for 7 days for free, which is more than enough time to get through that first course. And I hope this made a whole lot of sense. And I hope you enjoyed. You can use the link below if you want to access it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing if you're enjoying this channel, and I will see you in future videos.